Hello, my loves. Today's story is about a broken heart and a connection that may seem fake at first, but slowly turns into something deeply real. I think you'll truly enjoy this story, filled with unexpected feelings, a bond that grows little by little, and moments that touch the heart, all the way to the end. The worst decision I ever made started with a cup of coffee going cold on a table I was too heartbroken to sit at. Let me back up. I had been in love with Chloe Hartwell for 14 months, 2 weeks, and what felt like approximately 11,000 years. I know the exact number because I am, embarrassingly, a person who kept a journal at the time, and the first entry where her name appeared was dated September 4th of my junior year, scrawled in the margins of a sociology lecture I had completely stopped listening to the moment she walked in late, still wearing her sunglasses, still carrying a coffee that cost more than my textbook, still looking like she had just stepped off a film set where everyone was required to be effortlessly devastating. I wrote, Chloe Hartwell sat next to me today. She smells like cedar and something I cannot name. I am in trouble. I was in trouble. 14 months later, I was still in trouble, except now the trouble had a name and a pattern and a very specific shape that looked like this. Chloe would drift close to me for a few weeks, texting at midnight, finding reasons to sit beside me in the library, grazing my arm when she laughed, letting her shoulder press into mine at parties. Then she would drift away again, and I would spend 2 weeks eating cereal at odd hours and telling myself I was fine, absolutely fine, totally over it, completely done. Then she would drift back. And I would let her every single time because apparently I had the self-preservation instincts of a houseplant in a drought. The week everything changed, she had been in one of her drifting back phases. And I had been foolish enough to think maybe this time was different. Maybe this time I would say something real. Maybe this time she would stop looking at me like I was the most interesting puzzle she had never quite solved and actually reach for me. I had been walking around campus for 2 weeks in a state of low-grade electricity, the kind where every text notification makes your heart do something embarrassing, and every time you turn a corner, there is a small involuntary calculation about whether she might be there. She was not there when I wanted her to be. She was there instead, when I least expected it, and in the worst possible way. I found out via the extremely humiliating channel of watching it happen directly in front of me at the campus coffee shop that Chloe was apparently seeing someone. A graduate student named Petra, who had cheekbones like a Renaissance painting and the kind of quiet confidence that made people stop mid-sentence to stare at her. They were standing at the counter together. Chloe had her hand on the small of Petra's back. She was whispering something in her ear. Petra laughed. A private laugh, the kind that belongs only to the person who caused it. And Chloe's face did something soft and unguarded that I had never, in 14 months of wanting her, seen her turn toward me. I stood there with my cold latte and my very loudly breaking heart, and I thought, with devastating clarity, she has never once whispered anything in my ear. I left before they saw me. I sat on a bench outside the humanities building, and I put my headphones in without playing anything, and I stared at the middle distance for a long time, doing that very specific kind of breathing you do when you are trying not to cry in public. The kind where your whole chest is tight and your throat is doing something complicated and you are praying to every god who has ever existed that your eyes will just hold it together for approximately 12 more minutes until you reach your dorm room. I had been so certain this cycle was building to something. So certain that the next time she drifted back, I would have the courage to name what was happening between us, and she would look at me and the long, painful dance of almost would finally resolve. I had been holding that narrative close for over a year, warming myself on it in the cold stretches when she was away. And now I was sitting on a bench in October, watching it dissolve entirely. And the worst part, the really specific, pointed cruelty of it, was that she didn't even know I was sitting here. She was not even thinking about me right now. She was whispering in someone else's ear, and I was grieving something she had never quite given me permission to grieve. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sadie Chen. Now, Sadie Chen was not exactly my closest friend. She was more like a recurring presence in my life. We had 3 overlapping courses that semester. We had talked at enough parties to know each other's coffee orders and general life philosophies. And she had this habit of appearing exactly when I was least prepared for her and saying something that landed differently than anything anyone else had said all week. She was the kind of person who seemed to be paying attention to everything at once, like she had some extra perceptual equipment the rest of us hadn't been issued. It was a little unnerving, honestly. Meeting her eyes felt like being read. Her text said, "I just watched you flee the coffee shop like the building was on fire. You okay?" I looked up. She was standing maybe 30 feet away, outside the library entrance, a canvas bag over one shoulder and a very perceptive expression on her face. She was wearing that dark jacket she always wore, the one that fit her like it had been made for her specifically, and her dark hair was loose. And she was looking at me with the kind of direct attention that made you feel briefly transparent. I typed back, "I'm fine." She typed back, "You are famously not fine. Come sit with me." So I went and sat with her on the library steps, and I told her about Petra with the cheekbones. I told her about the hand on the back, and the whispered thing, and the soft, unguarded face. I told her about 14 months of cycling between almost something and nothing in a way that I hadn't told most of my friends, because most of my friends had opinions about Chloe that started with Maya, honestly, and went somewhere I wasn't always ready to go. Sadie listened in that very still, very complete way she had, where you felt like every word you said was actually being received rather than just heard. She didn't offer immediate opinions. She didn't say, "Oh no," or "I'm so sorry" in that reflexive, slightly hollow way. She just let me finish. Then she was quiet for a second. Then she said, "So what do you want to do about it?" I said, "I don't know. Nothing." Spiral quietly. She tilted her head. "That's boring, though." I looked at her. "Sorry?" "I mean, that's your call, obviously, but you've been letting Chloe Hartwell do the drifting thing to you for over a year, and I've watched it, and it seems painful and a little bit maddening, and also, and I say this with genuine care for you as a person, you deserve better than being someone's maybe." I stared at her for a moment. "How do you even know about the drifting thing?" She gave me a look that was almost fond. "Maya, everyone in our social circle has watched you quietly orbit that woman for a year. We've all been waiting for you to either combust or land." I opened my mouth, closed it, said, "That is horrifying to learn." She smiled. It was a very good smile, actually. Sadie had a smile that started slow and then arrived all at once, and it always felt like something being given rather than performed. "Here's the thing," she said. "Chloe Hartwell does not know what she has. And people like that, people who are used to having someone's attention without consequence, sometimes the only thing that gets through to them is the possibility of loss." I looked at her carefully. "Are you suggesting I make her jealous?" "I'm suggesting you give her something real to feel," Sadie said, "instead of just being available." The silence between us was very specific. I could feel my own heartbeat. "I don't exactly have a girlfriend to produce," I said. Sadie picked up her coffee cup, took a sip, set it down again with very deliberate calm. "You could," she said, "if you wanted." I stared at her. She looked back at me with those dark eyes that always seemed to be thinking 3 things at once, and she said, "I'm not seeing anyone. You're not seeing anyone. We have enough overlap in our social circle that it would be completely believable. And frankly, I could use the practice of being someone's girlfriend without actually being someone's girlfriend, for reasons I might explain later if we're both still speaking at the end of this conversation." "That is," I said very slowly, "a completely unhinged suggestion." "Yes," she agreed, "but you're considering it." And the frustrating thing was that she was right. I was considering it. I was sitting there on the library steps with my cold latte and my bruised heart, And I was looking at Sadie Chen, who was, now that I thought about it, genuinely beautiful, with her dark hair and her precise way of speaking, and that jacket she always wore that looked like it had been designed specifically to make people look twice. And I was thinking, this could work. Which was either the first sensible thought I'd had in 14 months or the beginning of a much larger disaster. The answer, it turned out, was both. We made rules that afternoon, sitting on those steps while the October light turned everything gold and slightly cinematic, which felt appropriate. Rule 1. We would be convincing in public but honest in private. Rule 2. No real feelings. Sadie said this with a very straight face, and I said, of course, absolutely, they're obviously, and I meant it completely at the time. I want to be clear about that. I was not secretly hoping it would become real. I was genuinely executing what I believed to be a strategy. Rule 3. Either of us could call it off at any time for any reason, no questions asked. Rule 4. We would give each other full veto power on public displays of affection, meaning nothing would happen that we hadn't both agreed to. Rule 5, which Sadie added at the end with a slight lift of her eyebrow. We don't lie to each other. Whatever this is, we're honest inside it. I thought that was a nice rule. Sensible, very mature. I agreed to it without fully understanding what it would eventually mean for me. The first time we appeared together as a couple, it was at Jonah Park's Thursday night gathering, a rotating event held in whichever apartment was cleanest that week, which this particular Thursday turned out to be Jonah's. I knocked on Sadie's door at 8:45, and she opened it in a dark green sweater that fit her exactly right. Her hair down, a small silver earring catching the hallway light, and she looked at me for a second and said, "You look nervous." "I'm not nervous," I said. "You're doing the thing where you press your lips together." "I'm not doing anything." She reached forward and touched my wrist very lightly, just a brush of her fingers, and said, "Hey, this is going to be fine. We're just going to a party. We already know each other. Just be with me." "Just be with me," she said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. Like being with her was a natural state rather than a calculated performance. I took a breath. Something in my shoulders released by half an inch. "Okay," I said. "Let's go." We walked into Jonah's apartment, and the first thing that happened, within approximately 4 minutes, was that Chloe looked up from across the room and saw us. I felt it before I saw it. The way the air changed slightly, the way a conversation I wasn't part of stuttered for just a second. Then I looked over, and Chloe's eyes were on me, and then on Sadie, and then on the way Sadie's hand had found the small of my back, because Sadie had done that without me asking, perfectly naturally, like it was just where her hand went when we were in a room together. The warmth of it registered in my spine before my brain caught up. Chloe's expression did something complicated, but she covered it fast. She was very good at that, at assembling her face back into something smooth and unreadable. She smiled. She looked away. She went back to her conversation. But I had seen it. That split second of something, a flinch, a recalibration, a very tiny earthquake behind her eyes, and something happened in my chest that was partly triumphant and partly terrible, and partly something else I didn't have a word for yet. Sadie leaned close and said quietly, near my ear. She noticed. "I know," I whispered. "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. "Complicated." She made a small sound that might have been acknowledgement, and her hand was still warm at the small of my back. "Good," she said. "Complicated means it's working." What I did not expect was how easy it was to be with Sadie in a room full of people. I had been dreading the performance of it, the careful choreography of pretending to be someone's girlfriend when you weren't, when every gesture felt scripted and slightly hollow. But Sadie moved through that party like she had always been the person I came with, and she made it feel not like a performance at all, but like something organic and real. She brought me into conversations seamlessly, one hand sometimes touching my shoulder, once my elbow, in the casual way of someone who does not need to announce possession, but simply acts like you are just theirs. She remembered something I'd said months ago about hating a particular song and mouthed no at me, sympathetically when it came on. She laughed at things I said, and the laugh was genuine. I could tell because Sadie's real laugh was a little surprised, like she hadn't expected to be as amused as she was, and it was very different from the polite laugh she used when she was being socially appropriate. Twice during the night, I looked up and found Chloe watching us. The first time, Chloe was mid-conversation with someone, her wine glass halfway to her mouth, and her eyes were tracking across the room to where Sadie and I were standing. When she caught me looking, she held my gaze for exactly 1 second, something questioning in it, and then looked deliberately away. The second time, it was later in the evening, and Sadie and I were in the corner near the bookshelf because we'd gotten pulled into a conversation with someone from Sadie's art history course, and the conversation had become genuinely interesting. Sadie was animated in the way she got when she was actually engaged. Her hands moving slightly, her voice quicker, her eyes bright. At some point, she turned to include me in what she was saying, and she put her hand against the bookshelf right beside my head, not quite leaning in, but close, and she was looking at me while she talked. And I was looking back, and I think from the outside, it probably looked like exactly the kind of private, absorbed attention that couples have. I'm not sure it was entirely a performance on my side. I'm not sure what it was. When I looked for Chloe again, she was standing slightly apart from her group, and she was watching us. And this time when she caught me looking, she didn't look away first. She looked at Sadie, then back at me. Her chin lifted, very slightly. And there was something in her face, something pressed and uncertain, that I had never seen there before. I drove home that night feeling something strange and electric, like the world had shifted slightly on its axis and hadn't fully settled back. I kept running the feel of Sadie's hand at my back. I kept seeing Chloe's face, the twice caught watching. I kept feeling the strange, warm pull of standing in that corner while Sadie talked with her whole body about something she cared about. I told myself, the plan is working. This is good. This is exactly what was supposed to happen. I believed about 60% of that. Over the next 3 weeks, Sadie and I built the relationship the way you build something without realizing you're building it, incrementally, naturally, one small thing at a time. We started having coffee together most mornings because we had a shared class at 9, and then the coffee became a habit that extended past the class, and the habit became conversations, and the conversations became the kind where you lost track of time and looked up and thought, oh, it's been 2 hours, how did that happen? She was funny in a way I hadn't fully registered before, dry and precise, and occasionally a little ruthless about things she found pretentious, which made me laugh more than I expected because I found myself agreeing with her constantly. She had strong opinions about literature and architecture, and the correct way to eat a burrito, and the ethics of skipping the first 15 minutes of any film you'd already seen. She laid those opinions out like she was genuinely interested in whether you agreed or not, rather than just waiting for you to validate them. When you pushed back, she actually engaged with the pushback, adjusted, changed her mind sometimes, held her ground other times, and always, always told you why. She also had this quality of noticing. I kept running into it and being surprised by it, like walking into a piece of furniture in a dark room. She noticed when I was tired before I said so. She noticed when I was trying to hide that something had upset me. She noticed when I was about to say something I didn't quite mean, and she would wait, very patiently, and then say, was that what you actually wanted to say, or was that the version you thought I wanted to hear? It was occasionally maddening. It was also, slowly, becoming the thing I looked forward to most in any given day. We had coffee one morning in the 3rd week, and she arrived slightly late with paint on her left hand. She was taking a studio course that semester, figure drawing, and she sat down and said, without preamble, "Tell me something you've never told anyone," and looked at me like she was settling in for something real. I said, startled, "Right now? Before I've finished my coffee?" "It doesn't have to be enormous," she said. "Just something true." I thought about it. Then I said, "I think the reason I've never said anything to Chloe in all this time is that as long as I didn't say it, There was still a version of events where she might choose me. And I was more afraid of being definitively not chosen than of the prolonged uncertainty. Sadie looked at me for a moment. "That's very honest," she said. "You asked." "I know. I'm glad you answered that way." She wrapped both hands around her mug. My turn. I think the reason I agreed to this arrangement, the real reason under the practical one, is that I have been alone in a way that felt less like freedom and more like waiting. And I thought I could have the shape of closeness without the risk of it, the practice run without the stakes. She looked up. Her eyes were steady. "I'm not sure that's a healthy reason." "I'm not sure mine is either," I said. "We're doing well," she said, dry. I laughed, and she did too, and the laughter was real, and the morning light was coming in sideways through the cafe window and catching the paint on her hand. And I thought, I like you. I genuinely, specifically like you. And then I drank my coffee and didn't say it out loud because we had a rule. Chloe, meanwhile, was doing exactly what Sadie had predicted. She was drifting back. She texted me things that didn't quite make sense. Random questions. Songs she said reminded her of me. A meme that was genuinely funny, but was mostly just a reason to text me at 11 at night. She started showing up in places I was. At the campus cafe. At the library at times she didn't normally study. She would sit near me and find reasons to talk. And there was something new in her voice when she did it. Something slightly careful and slightly urgent, like she was trying to find a foothold on a surface that used to be solid. One afternoon, she appeared beside me while I was studying in the quad, and she sat down without asking and said, "You seem different lately." "Different how?" I said, not looking up from my notes. "I don't know. More settled. Or less." She paused. "You always used to watch for me. You don't anymore." I looked up then. Chloe Hartwell was someone who was used to being the most luminous thing in any given room, and she was not wrong that I had always known where she was. I had been so reliably attuned to her for over a year that she had probably mapped my attention the way people map the furniture in their home. Not consciously, not gratefully, just dependably. Just there. "I've been busy," I said. "With Sadie," she said. Not quite a question. "Among other things." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a voice that was careful and slightly surprised at itself, "She seems good for you." The comment landed oddly. I looked at her. "Why do you say that?" "Because you smile different when you talk about her." She looked down at her own hands. "I've noticed." I didn't know what to do with that, so I went back to my notes. Chloe sat there for a few more minutes, not quite saying anything else, and then she left. And I sat there in the afternoon sun, and I thought about the phrase, "you smile different," and I turned it over in my head until it stopped making sense. The thing about almost realizations is that your brain will do extraordinary things to protect you from finishing them. It will construct elaborate scaffolding around the thing you're starting to know, and it will label all the scaffolding with very sensible names. We're friends, she's kind, I'm grateful, this is just the arrangement working well. And you will look at the scaffolding and feel that it is very solid, and you will be briefly reassured. And then something will happen that knocks the scaffolding down completely. For me, that something happened on a Wednesday afternoon in November. I had been sick. Nothing dramatic, just the tired, achy, miserable variety of sick that turns everything slightly gray. And I had spent 2 days in my room in the lowest effort version of myself. Unwashed hair, old sweatshirt, crackers, and bad television. I had texted Sadie to cancel our coffee and told her it was fine. I was fine, just a bit under the weather. She didn't need to do anything. She showed up at my door that afternoon with soup she had gotten from the good place across campus, and cold medicine, and a library book she'd grabbed because she'd remembered me saying 2 weeks earlier that I'd been meaning to read it, and a small thing of ginger chews because she had heard somewhere that they helped with the kind of headache that came with this type of cold. She knocked very softly, and when I opened the door, she looked at me in my very disheveled state and didn't do the polite thing of pretending I looked okay. She just said, with complete uncondescending warmth, "Hi, I brought provisions." I said, "You didn't have to." "I know," she said. "Are you going to let me in?" I let her in. She set up the soup on my desk and sat on the end of my bed, and she stayed for 3 hours. She didn't try to fix me or cheer me up or perform any type of comfort that wasn't actually wanted. She just sat with me while I ate the soup, and then she sat with me while I felt miserable, and she handed me tissues without commentary, and she talked to me when I wanted to talk, and was quiet when I didn't. There was something about the quality of her presence, the unhurried, completely present quality of it, like she had nowhere else to be and no part of her wished otherwise, that made the whole gray afternoon feel less alone. When I fell asleep on top of my covers in the middle of the third episode of some show I couldn't track anymore, she turned the laptop off and left a glass of water on my nightstand and put the library book where I'd see it when I woke up and sent me a text so I'd see it when I reached for my phone. The text said, "You're going to feel better soon. I'll be around if you need anything. Sleep well." I woke up at 10 p.m. and read that text and lay there in the dark for a while with something wide and aching opening up in the center of my chest, and I thought, I am in so much trouble. Not the Chloe kind of trouble, though. The Chloe kind was a thorn, something that caught and hurt. Oh, something that drew blood when you reached for it. This was different. This was the kind of trouble that felt like warmth where you were expecting cold, like a room you had convinced yourself was empty, turning out to be full of light. I lay there, and I let myself think it clearly, maybe for the first time. I have feelings for Sadie Chen. Real ones. Genuine, unperformed, terrifying ones. The kind that had nothing to do with strategy, and nothing to do with Chloe, and everything to do with soup, and library books, and a text at 10 p.m., and the way she said my name like she'd thought about exactly how to say it. The kind of feelings that did not ask for permission and did not respect the rules you had made. The kind that had apparently been building since approximately that second coffee on the library steps and had chosen this particular Wednesday night to announce themselves with full volume clarity. And the immediate problem with this realization, the crashing, loud, immediate problem, was that we had made a rule. No real feelings. We had both agreed. This was a performance, a strategy, a mutually beneficial arrangement. Sadie had her reasons for it, too. Reasons she'd mentioned once and then not elaborated on. And I had been so caught up in my own emotional spiral that I hadn't pushed hard enough to understand them. I didn't know what Sadie felt. I knew what she did. The soup, the book, the staying, the noticing, the way she sometimes looked at me a half-second longer than the situation technically required. But she was a kind person. She was a perceptive, careful, genuinely kind person. That was just who she was. That didn't mean I stopped that thought. I was not ready to finish it. What I was ready to do was to stop lying to myself about why I had agreed to this whole thing in the first place. Because here is the thing I had not let myself look at directly. The moment Sadie had said you could have a fake girlfriend if you wanted, I had felt something. Not strategic calculation, not practical evaluation of a useful arrangement. Something warmer and more frightened than that. A small, involuntary yes that I had immediately buried under the much more acceptable narrative of this is about Chloe. This is about the plan. This is about finally making her feel something. It had always been a little bit about Sadie. I just hadn't been brave enough to know it. The next week was a gallery opening at the Student Arts Building. One of those events that started as a cultured gathering and turned into something louder by 10 p.m. Sadie wore something black and simple that somehow looked extraordinary, and I spent more of the evening looking at her than I had intended to. She was animated the way she got when she was surrounded by art she found interesting, moving from piece to piece with that focused attention, sometimes catching my eye to share something she'd noticed, always pulling me into her experience of the room rather than just moving through it on her own. We were standing in front of a large abstract painting, blue and slate gray and one sharp line of gold, when Chloe found me. She appeared beside me holding a glass of wine and said very casually, "You and Sadie seem serious." I kept my voice neutral. "We are." Chloe turned her glass slowly in her fingers. She was looking at the painting, but I could tell she wasn't seeing it. "Since when? Does it matter?" She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "You never told me." "I didn't know it was something I needed to report." She turned and looked at me then, and her expression was doing that complicated thing again, the thing she was usually so good at hiding. There was something raw in it, something that might have been hurt, and something that might have been the specific, slightly indignant confusion of a person who has just discovered that a resource they took for granted has been redirected. I was not being uncharitable. I was just, finally, being clear-eyed. "Maya," she said. When the way she said my name was different from how she usually said it. Softer, less assured. I thought we were... What? I said, and my voice was gentle but honest. "What did you think we were, Chloe?" She opened her mouth. Closed it. The rawness in her face deepened, and then she pulled it back, assembled herself, and said, "I just didn't know things had changed." "Things are allowed to change," I said. Across the room, Sadie laughed at something her friend said, and I watched her for a moment without meaning to. The way her whole face changed when she laughed, the way she touched the other person's arm lightly while she listened, the way she was always fully present in whatever she was in. When I looked back at Chloe, Chloe was watching me watch Sadie, and the expression on her face was no longer ambiguous. It was something I had never seen from her before. The clear, unmistakable look of someone who realizes too late what they are in the process of losing. I felt the old, familiar ache, that grief-shaped hollow that had lived in my chest for 14 months. But underneath it was something else, something new and slightly terrifying, and it had Sadie's name on it. That night, walking back to the dorms, Sadie said, "You talked to Chloe." "She found me," I said. "How did it feel?" I thought about the honest answer. Different than I thought it would. She looked at me in the dark, our breath clouding in the cold November air. "Different how?" I said, very carefully. "I felt bad for her." Sadie was quiet for a second. Then she said, "That's interesting." "Is it?" "You spent a year wanting her to feel something about you," she said. And now that she does, you feel bad for her. That says something." I didn't ask what it said. I was afraid of the answer. But I carried the question with me like a stone in my pocket for the rest of the night. We reached the point where our paths divided, her building to the left, mine to the right, and Sadie stopped and turned to me and said, "Hey, whatever you're working through, you don't have to work through it alone, okay?" I looked at her in the lamplight, her face tilted up slightly because I was just a little taller than her dark eyes steady and serious and warm. She was looking at me with that quality of complete, uncomplicated attention that I had been absorbing for weeks without fully understanding what it was doing to me. "Okay," I said. She squeezed my hand. Let go. Walked to her building. I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to, watching the door she'd gone through. Whatever this is, I thought. It is not nothing. But I wasn't ready to say that either. Not yet. And then came the night that ended the carefully maintained fiction of my own uncertainty. It was a Saturday, 3 weeks after the gallery opening, and our group had gathered at someone's house, a bigger gathering than usual, sprawling across 2 floors, people I barely knew mixed in with people I'd known for years. The kind of party where the rooms get warm and the conversations get real, and the night runs later than anyone planned. Sadie and I had arrived together, because we always arrive together now. We had been moving through rooms, splitting apart and finding each other again with the natural rhythm of 2 people who are comfortable enough to not need to be in each other's pocket constantly. She had gone to get drinks. I had been cornered by someone from my English seminar who wanted to discuss a paper we both had due. I was mid-sentence when I felt the shift in the room. Chloe had found me again. Not just found, positioned herself beside me, a hand briefly on my arm, inserting herself into the conversation with the casual ease of someone who had always assumed the right to stand next to me. And she was, there is no other word for it, performing. Being at her most luminous, most charming, most Chloe. She was funny and warm and slightly electric in the way she got when she was working for something. And what she was working for, I realized with a lurch, was my attention. She was not subtle, leaning close when she spoke, finding reasons to touch my arm, my shoulder, asking me things that no one asks at a party. Real things, what I'd been thinking about, what I'd been writing, things that required me to be present and reciprocal. It was an extraordinary thing to be on the receiving end of after 14 months of almost. This was the version of Chloe I had imagined when I lay awake at night. This was the version I had been asking the universe for. And I was aware, with something between clarity and grief, that it had arrived about 4 weeks too late. I looked up over Chloe's shoulder and found Sadie. She was standing across the room with 2 drinks and she had seen everything. I could not entirely read her expression from that distance. She was good at the calm surface. But there was something in the set of her shoulders and the stillness of her face that told me she had been standing there long enough to see what was happening, to understand what it might look like, to have a reaction she was choosing not to show. She caught my eye. She gave me the most controlled, carefully neutral expression I had ever seen on a human face. And then she looked away and began a conversation with someone else. Something cold moved through my chest. I excused myself from Chloe. I moved across the room. I touched Sadie's elbow gently, and she turned with that controlled face and said, "You okay?" "Are you?" I said. "I'm fine," she said. And then she said something that was worse than anger would have been. "You should talk to her. If that's what you want. That's what this was for." The words landed with specific precision. That's what this was for. She was reminding me of the rules, of the purpose, of the fact that she had signed up to be a strategic arrangement, and she was holding herself to that commitment with the very particular dignity of someone who is hurting and refusing to let it show. "Sadie," I said. "I mean it," she said, and her voice was careful and even. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm fine. Go." I stood there for a moment, looking at her profile while she looked at something across the room. Then I went back. Not to Chloe. But I went to the kitchen, and I stood there with the sounds of the party around me, and I thought very clearly, I do not want to go back to Chloe. I want to fix the expression on Sadie's face. The realization sat in my chest like something that had been dropped from a height. Heavy and exact. I wanted to be the person who put that controlled look away and replaced it with the real one. I wanted her laugh, the surprised one, the real one. And I wanted to be the one who caused it. And I wanted it with a clarity that made the 14 months of yearning for Chloe feel like a long, confused dream I was only now fully waking up from. But Sadie spent the rest of that night being very gracious and very warm and very fine. And when we left, she said goodnight at the door of her building with a hug that was a half-second shorter than usual. Wow, and I walked to my own building, and I sat on my bed in the dark, and I thought about what I was going to do. The answer I arrived at was, be honest. Be honest before this gets worse. Be honest because we had a rule, and the rule was the only thing that felt solid. But I waited too long. The next morning, Chloe texted me. She said she needed to talk to me, and could we meet? And I said yes, because I thought I knew what I was going to say to her, and I wanted to say it clearly so she could stop tilting toward me and rearrange herself around the truth. What I did not know was that Sadie would see us. I met Chloe on the far side of campus, at a quieter cafe, and we sat across from each other, and she said, with more directness than she had ever used with me in 14 months, "I know you're with Sadie. And I know I have no right to say any of this. But I'm saying it anyway, because not saying it feels worse." She said things. Real things. Things I had waited for. I listened to all of them. I told her the truth. That I heard her. That I believed her. That she was not nothing to me and had never been. and that I was in love with someone else. I said the last part, quietly, but clearly. And it was the first time I had used those words about Sadie, even in my own head, and the truth of it hit me with a force I wasn't entirely ready for. Chloe asked who. I said Sadie. She nodded once. She looked down at her hands. She said, I figured. She said, she's good. She said, I'm sorry I took so long. And I said I was sorry too. And I meant it, because I think we had both done damage in that long, slow, almost and not quite. And some of it had been mine too. It was a real conversation, an honest one. It resolved something that had been unresolved for a long time, and I walked away from it feeling lighter and sadder and more clear than I had felt in months. And then I walked around the corner and found Sadie standing outside the library with her canvas bag and her straight back, and an expression that told me she had been walking toward the cafe and had seen us through the window and had turned around before I saw her. She looked at me. Her face was doing something I had not seen it do before, something cracked, something that was trying very hard to be neutral and was not quite managing it. Sadie, I said. I'm going to class, she said. Sadie, wait. It's fine. Her voice was very even and very precise. It's fine. This was the plan. This is good, right? She's available. You've been in love with her for over a year. This is what it was all for. She adjusted the strap of her bag. I'm glad it worked. That is not what happened, I said. I was saying goodbye to her. Something moved in her face. Goodbye, she repeated. I told her I was in love with someone else. The something that had been cracked went very still. I need to talk to you, I said. Not in the middle of the path, but I need to talk to you. She looked at me for a long moment. The controlled face was still there, but it was thinner now, like paper held up to light. I have class in 10 minutes, she said. Tonight, I said. Please. She held my gaze. Something shifted in her eyes. Not quite open, not quite closed. Okay, she said quietly. Tonight. She walked away. I stood there and I watched her go and I thought, please let me not have broken this. Please let me be in time. She was not at the door when I knocked that evening at 8. She was already inside, sitting at her desk rather than her usual place on the bed, arms around her own knees, and that told me something. She was putting a little distance between herself and whatever this was. She was protecting herself. She had been protecting herself, I realized, since approximately the moment she agreed to a rule about no real feelings, and the irony of it, that we had both been using the structure to contain something we were both already feeling, settled on me with the weight of something I should have seen much sooner. I sat down on the floor because sitting in the chair across from her felt too formal, and I looked up at her and I said, I need to explain what happened today. You don't? I do, I said. Because you saw me sitting with Chloe, and I know what it looked like, and I know what you thought, and I need you to know the truth, not just the version that fits into what we agreed this was. She was looking at me very carefully. I met with Chloe to tell her clearly that I wasn't available, I said, that I had said goodbye to that part of things. And when I said that to her, I used specific words that I hadn't said out loud before, and hearing myself say them made things very clear to me. I took a breath. I told her I was in love with someone else. Sadie's eyes were very steady. Maya, I'm not done, I said. I know we made rules. I know this was supposed to be a performance, and I know you signed up for something that had an expiration date and a practical purpose, and I'm not here to make you responsible for my feelings. I'm here because we also made a rule about honesty, and I think I owe you honesty even when it's complicated. So here it is. Somewhere between the library steps and the soup and the approximately 900 conversations where you made me feel like the most interesting person in the room, I stopped performing. I stopped performing a long time ago. I was just too scared to name it because I didn't know what you felt, and I didn't want to make you responsible for something you hadn't signed up for. I paused. So that's the truth, I said. All of it. You can do whatever you want with it. Sadie uncurled herself from the desk chair. She came and sat on the floor in front of me, cross-legged, close enough that our knees were almost touching, and she looked at me for a long moment with those dark eyes. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "When I brought you soup," she said carefully, "was that about the arrangement?" "No," I said. "When you remembered the specific book I mentioned wanting 3 weeks ago?" "No," I said again. "When you stood in that corner at the party and watched me talk about something I loved," she said, with that expression that I had to keep talking to stop myself from looking directly at. "Sadie," I said. "I need to say my thing too," she said, and her voice was lower now and steady, with a kind of steadiness that was different from the controlled one. This was not control. This was certainty. "I told you I agreed to this because I wanted the shape of closeness without the risk." And that was true. But it was also true that I noticed you the moment you sat down on those library steps looking like your heart had been kicked. And I thought, even then, I thought there is someone I would like to know better. And everything after that was me trying very hard to stay inside the rules I had set for myself. She paused. "I'm not very good at it, it turns out." "You hit it extremely well," I said. My voice came out a little rough. "I had practice," she said. "After being told I was too much, after deciding the only safe version of closeness was the version with a clear exit." She looked down at her own hands, then back up at me. "And then you went and talked about your real things and looked at me like I was something worth looking at. And you let me take care of you when you were sick without making it weird. And you pushed back on my opinions with this very specific expression, like you were genuinely enjoying the argument. And I failed the rule about 4 weeks in." I said, very quietly. 4 weeks in was the dumpling." She laughed, and it was the real laugh, the surprised one, and it broke something open in the air between us in the best possible way. 4 weeks in was the dumpling," she agreed. I reached forward and took her hand. Her fingers wrapped around mine, warm and immediate, with the particular warmth of something that had been waiting to be allowed. "I don't want to fake anything anymore," I said. "Then don't," she said. "I stopped faking somewhere around week 2, which means I have been running a very unconvincing performance for the past month and a half, and it is genuinely a relief to stop." I leaned forward, and she leaned forward, and we met in the middle, and she kissed me the way she did everything, with her whole presence, unhurried, completely committed, her hands coming up to hold my face like she had thought about exactly how she wanted to do it. I had kissed someone before with wanting. The wanting for Chloe kind. The reaching, yearning, always slightly out of reach kind. I had kissed people and felt like I was trying to get somewhere. This didn't feel like trying to get somewhere. This felt like arriving. I know that sounds almost too simple. But that was it. That was the whole thing. It was the difference between reaching for something and being given something. Oh, and I had been reaching for so long that the gift of it, the honest, uncomplicated, completely mutual gift of it, made something behind my sternum come undone in the best way. Like a knot I had stopped noticing until the moment it was finally, gently untied. We sat together in her warm room for the rest of the evening, talking the way we always talked, except now with this new honesty between us, this acknowledgement that everything we'd been doing had been real even when we were calling it otherwise. She told me more about her ex, the one who said she was too much, and I told her what it had been like to want someone who kept themselves just out of reach. We compared wounds, gently, the way people do when they're deciding whether to trust each other with the tender places. We did not rush past them or cover them with the urgency of the new feeling. We stayed with them, because that is what you do when you want to build something that lasts. You let each other see the full picture. "I want to do this right," I said, late in the evening. "I want you to know that the noticing, the attention, I don't feel studied. I feel seen, which is completely different. And I have never had anyone make me feel that way, and I want you to know it's the thing I was always looking for even when I didn't know that's what it was." "You are not too much," I said, quieter. You are exactly the right amount of everything. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, I want to believe that. You'll get there, I said. I'll help. She turned and looked at me sidelong and said, with that dry precision I had fallen in love with approximately 70 small moments ago. That is the most confident promise anyone has made to me in years. I'm a confident person, I said. You are famously not a confident person. You spent 14 months not telling Chloe Hartwell you liked her. And yet here I am, I said, having found you instead, so clearly the universe was managing things. She made a small, soft sound. The universe, she said, had nothing to do with it. I very deliberately sat down next to you on those steps. I turned to look at her. You did. Obviously, she said. I had been looking for a reason to talk to you for 2 months. I stared at her. Sadie. What? You sat down next to me and proposed a fake relationship. It seemed like the most efficient approach, she said, without a trace of apology. What? You needed someone to talk to, and I needed an excuse to spend time with you. The fake girlfriend element was practical. You are unbelievable, I said. She was smiling. The arriving smile. Is that a complaint? No, I said. Absolutely not. It's an observation. She leaned against my shoulder, and I felt the weight of her, warm and real. And I thought about how strange and circuitous the route had been. From a cold coffee cup on a table I was too heartbroken to sit at, to this warm room, to this person who had shown up with soup and library books and the most frightening question I'd ever been asked. What do you actually want? I had thought I knew. I had been so sure of the wanting, certain of its direction, certain of its shape, certain that if Chloe would just see me, the yearning would resolve into something complete. But what I'd actually been doing for 14 months was falling in love with the idea of being chosen by someone who kept almost choosing me. That is not love. That is a habit. A very painful, very convincing habit, but still, a habit. Something your nervous system learns to organize itself around because it is at least familiar. What Sadie had done, without intending to, or maybe with that careful, sharp intelligence of hers that I was still only beginning to fully understand, was show me what being chosen actually felt like. Not the almost choosing, not the drifting back. The clear, direct, I am paying attention to you. Specifically, I show up with soup because I want to. I remember the book you mentioned because I listen. I call you on it when you lie to yourself. Chosen. It was entirely different. It was, in fact, like the only thing that had ever really felt like what I'd been looking for. In the weeks after, the world kept moving in the ordinary way that it does after things that feel enormous. Classes, deadlines, social obligations, the cold deepening into December. But everything had a different quality, a warmer grain to it. Sadie and I stopped performing. We didn't announce anything dramatically or make a show of the transition. It happened the way the fake thing had happened in reverse, organically, one small acknowledgement at a time. She held my hand in the dining hall without calculating the audience. I texted her first thing in the morning because I wanted to, not because it served a purpose. We stopped accounting for the arrangement and just were. And it turned out that when you stripped away the scaffolding of strategy from what we'd been doing, what was left underneath was simply and clearly a relationship. A real one. The kind where someone knows your coffee order and your 3 a.m. thoughts and the specific pitch of your laugh when something surprises you and loves all of it. For the record, Chloe and I remained on decent terms. Awkward for a while, as these things always are. She started seeing someone new by February, someone who seemed more emotionally available, and who, from all accounts, she was genuinely good to. I hope she was. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it, which was its own kind of closure. The kind you don't arrange. You just notice one day when you realize you went 3 weeks without thinking about someone who used to occupy the entire landscape of your inner life. What I thought about instead, in January and February and all the months after, was Sadie. I thought about her in the mornings, when I woke up and reached for my phone to see if she'd sent the daily random thing. She had a habit of texting me things she found interesting at odd hours, articles, observations, a photograph of something she'd seen on campus that she thought I'd like, which was often something small and overlooked, a spider web with frost on it, a building she thought had an underappreciated cornice. I thought about her in the evenings, when she would come to my room, or I would go to hers, and we would do the unremarkable. Oh, completely cherished ordinary things, eat bad takeout and argue pleasantly about books, and watch something on a laptop, and fall asleep with her head on my shoulder and the string lights doing their quiet golden work. I thought about her the day, in late February, that she and I were walking across the snowy quad, and she stopped dead in the middle of the path and said, "Look," and pointed at a crow that had somehow obtained a French fry and was being chased by 3 other crows. And she laughed at it with her whole body, surprised delight, that real laugh. And I thought, I am so glad I was paying attention that day on the library steps. I am so glad I didn't spiral quietly. There was one more conversation that needed to happen, and it happened in March. On one of those early spring evenings when the light goes long and golden and everything smells like cold earth and the possibility of warmth. We were sitting on the same library steps where everything had started, because I had suggested it and Sadie had given me a knowing look and said, "Are we being sentimental?" And I had said, "Absolutely yes." And she had smiled and come with me. We had coffee. Hers black, mine embarrassingly sweet. The campus was busy around us with the post-winter energy of everyone coming back outside. "I want to say something," I said. Sadie turned to look at me. "Okay." "I want to say, I know how it started. I know I came to you with a plan about someone else, and you came to it with your own reasons, and I know in theory there's something a little bit chaotic about how we got here." I paused. "But I need you to know that nothing I feel for you is about her. It hasn't been about her for a long time. Maybe it never really was, and I just needed the scaffolding to fall down before I could see that. What I feel for you is specific to you. It's about the paint on your hand in the mornings and the way you wait for me to find the real answer instead of accepting the polished one and the fact that you show up. Every single time, without being asked, you show up. And I have never had that before, and I don't take it for granted, and I am not going to." Sadie looked at me for a long, still moment. Then she said, "Okay, my turn." "Your turn." "I want to say, I was scared after we stopped pretending. I was scared that I had loved the fake arrangement because it was safe. And that once it became real, I would become too much again, and you would eventually need space from me in a way that used a kinder word, but meant the same thing. I was scared that you'd realize you got what you needed from the plan, and the feelings would fade when the purpose did." She looked down at the coffee cup in her hands. "I'm not scared of that anymore." "What changed?" I said quietly. She looked up. "You did," she said. "You keep choosing me, every day, in the small ways that matter more than the grand ones. You choose me." She said it simply, without performance, the way she said all the true things. That's new for me, and I'm not taking it for granted either. I reached over and took her hand. Her fingers wrapped around mine, warm and certain and home. "I love you," I said. Yeah, I said it clearly and without cushioning and without immediately qualifying it with anything, which was a significant act of bravery for me, and she knew that, and I could see her knowing it. She looked at me with those dark eyes in the long gold light, and she said, with all the warm precision she had ever brought to anything, "I love you too. I have for a while. It's quite inconvenient. I'm very glad." I kissed her there on the library steps in the March light, in front of whoever was walking by, with absolutely no strategy and no performance, and nothing fake left anywhere between us. I know people say the heart is not a simple organ. I know the story I am telling you sounds like it resolves neatly, like a door closing on a before and opening on an after. But that is the thing about finding someone who actually chooses you. The resolution does not feel like a neat click. It feels like something loosening. It feels like you have been holding your breath for a very long time. For so long, you forgot you were doing it, and you have finally let it go. That is what Sadie felt like to me. The exhale at the end of 14 months of held breath, the room with light in it, the person who showed up with soup and stayed, and who never once made me feel like a question she hadn't decided how to answer. She made me feel like the answer, like the thing she had been paying attention for. And when you find a person who does that, who holds your specific self with that kind of care and intention, who notices you and calls you on your lies and stays anyway and stays, you stop looking at any other door. You just walk into the room. You put your things down. You stay. That is the whole story. That is all of it. That is exactly how I fell in love with the woman I was only pretending to date, which turned out to be the realest, most completely true thing I have ever done.